Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues so that you get to decide. This episode is all about the upcoming presidential election. With such a rapidly changing election landscape, candidate swaps, ballot mixing, legally questionable moves, unalive attempt after attempt, and stomach-churning debates, we are in desperate need of a DC insider to cut through the noise and break it all down for us. So we're hearing straight from the political insider, the Honorable Bob McEwen. Bob served the great state of Ohio as a six-term member of Congress. That's 12 years, y'all. He's an economics guy, but really he's a political generalist with connections on connections in DC. Congressman, I'm sure glad you're with us today on Politically Basic. We have a lot to talk about, so thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Kyle, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Well, I want to hear from you first on what your focus is right now during this election season. Can you share with our listeners, what are you focusing on right now? What are you working on?
Well, I think the number one concern that many Americans have is whether or not our election system is safe. And what happened is that we had local voters. You voted at the local fire station. The people there that you knew, you recognized them when you saw them, and they identified you and took your name on a paper ballot, and they counted it at the end of the day. And that worked very, very well for 240 years. But during the George W. Bush administration, they've got this thing called the Every Person Vote Act, in which they got billions of dollars and began to farm it out to the secretaries of state who are responsible for the elections in each state, and to the state capitals, and then filtered down to the local election, and to replace that system that had worked so well with an electronic system where you would vote electronically. And so in Arizona, for example, when you would show up, you had to wait. And what some states chose to do is they would actually print the ballot. You could vote at almost any place. They said, "Where do you live?" "Oh, you live there. Therefore, the people running for your school board, your city," and they would print the ballot, and then you put it in, and you lost that touch to the point that most Americans, the majority of Americans, fear that our election process is not secure. That, for example, in Arizona 2 years ago, when they were running for governor, the Secretary of State had taken half as many of the machines as they had in 2020. So in 2022, they reduced in many of the areas the machines to half its number. So the lines were extremely long, and elderly folks in that state are standing in line for hours and hours to vote, and many of them went home and were not able to. And so there's a sense of frustration that our electoral system is compromised. And so in answer to your question, what am I concerned about? I'm concerned about making sure that we have poll watchers. These are people that understand the law, and that they show up at the voting booth, so that the most important thing is at the end of the day, count the exact number of people that voted in each category, and hopefully oversee the point that we can't have the questions that arose in some of the states. One dump in the middle of the night in 2020 in Pennsylvania, 453,000 votes, nearly 500,000 votes dumped, and there were zero, not one of them was for Donald Trump. So now everybody says, "Do you question the vote?" And it was the safest vote. Well, you have to believe that a nearly 500,000 votes suddenly arrived, and no one in that area, no one, there's only 2.5 million people voting for the candidate. And so that this 500,000, not one single voted for Donald Trump. That cuts to the very heart of our faith in our government system. And so therefore, I think there's nothing greater contribution we can make to our country to make sure that we're registered to vote, make sure that we do vote, and then to participate. And there are many ways, Turning Point USA and others, places where you can volunteer to be schooled in the law so that you have a right as an American citizen to sit there and see what's going on. And if we do that, then we can restore confidence in our voting system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Election integrity is a big topic this cycle. And there have been some changes with some of the systems, and we're going to get into that in a little bit in this discussion. But I love just getting your general take on all of this, because you are kind of the man who knows everyone, talks to everyone, sits on every board. You really understand better than so many what's actually going on with this election. And it's such a strange one. So I guess, Bob, right now, I would really love your take just generally on what you think about this presidential election cycle so far.
Well, if we're going to speak generally, let's talk about America first of all. And that is, America holds a position in the world unlike any other nation on earth. We're only 4% of the population, the other 96%, but they follow our lead. Therefore, we are the standard for righteousness in the world. If a ship is attacked on the high seas, whether it be a yacht in the Caribbean or a trawler in the South China Sea or a British tanker in the Straits of Hormuz, to whom can they appeal? Only the 327,000 Americans that wear the uniform of the United States Navy. So that's what maintains through the internet that people communicate all over the world, conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. There's a ship parking in Hong Kong and Singapore at this moment using a global positioning system, a plane flying over the continent of Africa using a global positioning system conceived, invented, maintained by Americans. So people rely upon America for what is right, for copyright law and for economic questions. Now, if you want to upset that, if you want to, for example, control the South China Sea and to say that you want Japan imports 100% of their oil, for example, and you would say to Japan, there's going to be a tax on all the oil coming through the South China Sea unless you break relations with Israel. That's what happens when another nation is the superior nation on earth, other than the righteous nation of America. And America is the only nation on earth in the history of the world that ever became this position that didn't seek it. The Romans and the British and the Spanish and everyone else, the Greeks, they pursued world domination. They knew what they had to do to get there and what to stay there. Americans were trusted after World War II with doing these things. Therefore, who we choose to lead our country affects them very greatly. And I was attending the prayer breakfast in Kiev, Ukraine in 2021. And these members of parliament, the presidential prayer breakfast, were pulling on my arm. This is October. They said, don't you understand what you Americans are doing, what this means to us, and the threat from Russia and all. And so we see all of that. So in our dilemma, in our consequences of who we should vote for, America has a position that is unlike any place else, and they are praying and hoping that we will choose the right kind of leadership. And so the American dollar is the symbol for the international currency. There is a great effort to undermine that. And we have an administration, people in Washington at the moment, that are supportive of replacing the American dollar. Now, that kind of thing where we reduce the strength of our military and our Navy, we reduce the strength of our economy, all those things impact the rest of the world, but there's nothing they can do about it. They can pray and hope and cross their fingers, but only you and I have the privilege of voting, and we need to choose someone. And so in answer to your question, so how do I see it? I see that the world that had a strong American economy at peace in the Middle East, nations making peace with Israel for the first time in history, America is showing the kind of strength and confidence with NATO and else. I see all of that having dissipated. We see chaos in the South China Sea, in the Middle East, in Ukraine. And therefore, I believe that it's essential that we restore confidence to strong leadership and we make a change in Washington.
I'm so glad that you are describing that as a more global view of what's at stake here. I think that we have honed in and been very distracted, really. You know, you can lay this at the feet of our media in keeping us very distracted and sort of with the blinders on and just really focused on our drama here at home, right, with this presidential election. But we are that key critical puzzle piece that keeps everything else together. And I'm so glad you're talking about this, Bob, because I hope that more people understand what's at stake when we are electing a leader of the United States. It has such a tremendous ripple effect on what happens internationally and globally. And we have got a presidential candidate who I am very concerned. I know a lot of other people have tremendous concern about her understanding of the very thing that you just spoke about. Give us your take on Kamala Harris, on this point, on how she was, let's call it, installed. Nancy Pelosi just gave an interview saying that claiming they had an open primary. I think I maybe missed that if that happened. But her likability factor, the confidence level you have in her leadership abilities for what she wants to take on here.
Well, one of the things about the left, and you'll observe this through your entire life, the left will always accuse you of doing what they are doing. And so they accuse the rest of us of being dictators, or that democracy is on the ballot and democracy is at risk. Well, I have some friends with us. We were just communicating with Robert Kennedy here just a few minutes before we started taping. And Robert Kennedy is a lifelong Democrat. His family has been a leadership in the Democrat Party forever in the Congress. He wanted to run for president, and the Democrat Party began to rule him off. The secretaries of state refused to allow him to get on the ballot. And in places where he did get on the ballot, they literally canceled the primary. They just didn't even have the election. And so then as they proceeded on, and Mr. Biden had a debate, and it was apparent that he was as incompetent as people knew that he was. And so they met in a room. Now, this has never happened in American history, Kyle. They met in a room, and who were these people? Multi-billionaire globalists. These are people who have billions of dollars, who control the network, Disney, which controls ABC, and Comcast controls CBS. These are international billionaires who got together and looked at the president of the United States. Now stop and think about this. You want to talk about democracy being on the ballot. They took a sitting president of the United States and said, "You're out of here, son. We're going to bring in somebody else," and forced him to step down. And as you mentioned, Nancy Pelosi prided herself on it. It was all done in California with these billionaires. And who are they? They are people whose loyalty is to their international organizations. And what they want to do, Kyle, is that they want to have their businesses operate in countries like China, other countries where they don't have the environmental protection, so that they can just burn any kind of stuff that they want. They can mistreat the customers, so that the batteries that they're producing in Congo, where these little children are working 12 and 14 hours a day. And I mean, I'm talking 6, 7, 8-year-olds are working in these cobalt mines, are working over a dozen hours a day, slave labor for all intents and purposes. And then they can then get a Congress that will demand that we have battery operated cars, then they'll be able to make money on their batteries and things. And so these people, their loyalty is not to America. Their loyalty is to the international globalism. Now, there is a person that is a threat to that. That person who is a threat to that is Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants America to be strong, and to America produce its cars, and America produce these things. And so therefore, they're in this fight. It is a great threat to our democracies we've ever seen, coming from those who want to choose an opponent and destroy the choices of the American people. There's one other thing I want to talk to. Maybe we should let you ask a question first, but there's something that in talking about the international, a question of inflation. And one of the things you mentioned, I have an economic interest, and it's important for us to understand what inflation is. Because when you hear people say certain things like a farmer's cause inflation, or the price of, they need to understand what inflation is. Can I go through that? Or
please, absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
We want to break down these concepts, and you are the economics guy. So yes, please explain for our listeners what that terminology is. What is inflation? What are we talking about?
Now, you only have to learn this once. And once you know it for the rest of your life. And here's what inflation is. Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. Now, it's better if I have a chart. So you have more money chasing a limited number of goods. Now, when the money supply and the growth in the economy remain the same, prices remain the same. However, when you decrease the supply, then let's just give an example. When you suddenly decrease the supply, let us suppose you wake up in the morning and the water system is polluted in your town. And so everybody runs to grab some water, bottled water. Well, what happens to the price? The supply has been reduced, so there's more money chasing the limited supply. And so what happens to the price? The price goes way up. Now, actually, that's a very good thing, because what does it say? It's a price signal to the marketplace. Well, look at how much you can get for water. Water is sold sold for $1.10 a bottle yesterday. Today, you can sell it for $4. And so what does that do? That means that people then, the entrepreneurs hop in their trucks, they drive 50 miles away, they start buying all the water they can, bringing it back, selling it at $4. And as they increase the supply, the price begins to come back down until it's in equilibrium again. So when Joe Biden, on the very first day that he became president, the very first day he walked over and he turned off the XL pipeline and the Keystone pipeline and the production of the first natural gas production facility in Houston, natural gas, so that we have more natural gas. The United States has more natural gas than any place on the planet. And so the people in Europe need it. And so he shut it all off there so that then the people in Europe would have to buy it from Putin and that sort of thing. He limited the supply. And what happened? Every one of us knows what happened. The price of gasoline immediately went up because it reduced the supply. Now, there's another way to do it, and that is you can increase the amount of money. And when you print more money, how do you do that? You spend money that if you're running in Congress or in this government, the amount of money that you come in is the amount of money that goes out, and it remains the same. In a federal government, you can actually print more money. You can spend more money than you have. And so what he did was he passed, and Kamala Harris provided the one vote margin of $1.7 trillion, suddenly spending for really nothing. They said, oh, it's a Green New Deal, and it's just to dump more money into the system, which then drives up the price. So how do you get rid of inflation? You have to bring those two into balance. You control the deficit spending, and you increase the supply. If we have a new president, he will do both of those things. And what he'll do is he'll go over and immediately turn on the XL pipeline and the Keystone pipeline and allow people to start to drill. And the price of gasoline will fall just as quickly as it increased when they did the other way, then by controlling spending. So inflation, and now interest rates, what does inflation mean? Inflation means that your money is not worth as much as it was. So if I'm going to loan you money, I want all of that back at the same value. And if it's diminishing, then I have to increase the price of the money, which is called interest rates. So that the higher the inflation, the higher the interest rates. So that when we had a 1.2% inflation when Donald Trump was president, the mortgage payments for the house were 2.27 or 2.77%. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came in and they began increasing the spending, reducing the supply, driving up inflation, that meant that the margin, the interest rates had to go to 3, 4, 5, 6. Now they're at 7. So that the same house, and I'll conclude with this, the exact same house that in 2020, to purchase that house, if you're a 35-year-old wanting to buy a home, the payments on that house with inflation and the increased interest rates, the payments are now twice as high as they were in those days. That's why people are losing hope. Now, when they lose hope, and you really found it up, these people have the audacity to say, we're going to turn the page, we're going to start over, we're going to do all. No. You're the ones that got us in the ditch. We cannot follow you anymore. We need to go back to doing the same principles that made America strong again. And that's what the competition, the fight is all about in this election.
I love the way that you're breaking this down. It makes so much sense and leads us beautifully into the next thing I want to talk to you about, Bob, is that, you mentioned the left accusing the other side of everything that they're doing. It's actually a textbook classic tactic of an abuser. And another thing that abusers do is they gaslight. I know we keep hearing that term over and over again, is that the media and these campaigns are gaslighting the American people. And just to your very point that you just made, it's been really surprising to see the level at which the Harris campaign is really covering, and the media stepping up to cover for them, everything that's happened in the last nearly 4 years. She won't take media interviews. They are issuing statements. She, straight steals talking points and policy plans from the Trump campaign. It's pretty shocking. I really want to ask you very, we've kind of been dancing around this, I think, in this election cycle, but you're going to give it to us straight. And I appreciate that you will. Are we considering voting for a candidate who will actually be in charge in the White House? If Kamala Harris is elected, what's going to happen? Who will actually be running the country? Or is she just a front woman, which many people have said, the administration currently is certainly not being run by Joe Biden himself. What's going to happen if Kamala Harris is elected, and who will really be in charge of the United States of America?
I think you answered the question right there. The question for anyone to ask themselves, who's running the country at this moment? As we know, Biden hasn't even had a cabinet meeting. I think he's only had 2 or 3 the entire time he's been president. He hasn't had one for over a year. So actually, who's running the president? Who's running the country? He's out on the beach for weeks at a time. And so this is a very, very dangerous time. So they talk about a dictatorship. A dictatorship is where you're not consulted, and the levers of power are not being used as established by the constitutions. What we see is nobody can tell you who's making the decisions to not give protection for the presidential candidate, for example. And in the context of the press is so involved in that, is to even just ignore the fact that there is an attempted coup in our. Not only was there a successful coup in replacing a candidate for president, choosing a person elected by no one but anointed by them, but also then trying to destroy the Republican choice for president, and barely making a blip when in this second attempt none of the major news organizations even mentioned it the following day. So you can see that this is a very dangerous time. And in the process of that, let me just augment as to the strength of America. We had a president that said to me one time, he said, a country is judged by 4 things. The strength of a nation is 4 things. Economic, the strength of the economy. Military, the strength of its military. For example, the economy of Russia is the same size as the state of New York. So economically, it's not a powerhouse. It doesn't make cars and refrigerators like South Korea does and that kind of thing. So it has oil and gas, but Russia is a power on the national stage, on the international stage, because of its military. So it's the 4 steps are economic, military, political. Do people trust the system? Venezuela is not a threat at the moment because people do not trust it. No, people there can't stand the government as things in chaos. So the strength of the government. And then the 4th one, and I'll pause to focus on this: economic, military, political, and leadership. The leadership is as important as any of the other 3. And so I lived through the time when Jimmy Carter was in the White House. And the fact we had a strong military or the strongest economy in the world, and it was immaterial because our leadership was so drastically poor that more countries went communist under his government than any time since Truman, and the chaos that took place with the gas lines and all the rest. So the leadership is critically important. Now let's get back to this election. Just stop and think. If you are sitting here listening to us and engaged in this conversation at this moment, ask yourself, for the single most powerful position in the world that other nations are on the edge of their seats saying, who is America going to choose? Can you tell me one thing that you can reliably trust that Kamala Harris stands for? I believe she stands for the things that she said she did, confiscating guns and those kinds of things. But now she said, oh, well, maybe not. And also you need to watch their wording. Now, for example, we are able to produce oil to the point that we don't need to import any oil at all from the Middle East. We didn't take it at all. Under Biden and Harris, they shut down the wells here, and we are now importing oil from the Middle East, sending billions of dollars abroad, and importing oil from Venezuela, who the government hates our guts, and we're doing that. Now she said, well, I'm not going to ban fracking, and they said, oh look, she changed. She didn't change at all. She said she was going to ban fracking in 2020. Now she says, I'm not going to ban it. Well, you don't have to ban it. All you have to do is not permit the permits or the drilling. So she doesn't say she's in favor of fracking, which is drilling for oil. She didn't say she's in favor of it. She said, I'm not going to ban it. Now, if you're a politician or a lawyer, you can figure out exactly what she's saying. That is, she's going to continue to ban the production of oil in our country, and will continue to be in the condition that we are. That's essential for us to make this decision. Do we want to continue to be a diminished nation on the world stage, which is not to our freedom or our security or our allies? Or do we want to get a leader that can restore peace and prosperity again? And that's what's before us. And never in my experience in government have I seen a person less qualified. If you look at the interview that they had with Oprah, for example, where she gave her 3 and 4 minutes to answer a simple little question, and she wandered on, she literally does not have a clue. I just talked about inflation. You could tell she doesn't have any idea what causes inflation. She said, I'm going to go after the grocery stores, the price of food going up. You know what the profit is? Kroger Corporation, Cincinnati, in my congressional district. Kroger Corporation, their profit is 1.2%. 1.2%. Inflation isn't caused by Kroger Corporation. Inflation is caused by what she did, but she literally, I don't believe that she knows. And so she says these things that are just so dangerous for our future. And anyone, we have a responsibility to make sure we're registered to vote, and that we vote, and that we watch what happens at the voting booth to make sure they don't steal the election.
Yeah, the voting component is so critical here. But what you're saying, I really want people to be listening very carefully, because I think this is a mindset shift that we have to have at this point. You know, we're in the weeds. We're distracted with kind of these policy talking points. And in the moment, for some people who want to vote for her, they don't want Donald Trump for whatever reason. Maybe they don't like him, or they've bought into talking points that aren't true, or for a myriad of reasons, you just don't want Donald Trump. And the only alternative is Kamala Harris. And so I think people are looking for things to attach to and to hold on to and say, like, okay, that sounds good. You know, I want to believe that things are going to get better. But you're absolutely right. When you are breaking down the basics of inflation, all I'm thinking of is I wish someone would ask her that, because I don't have confidence that she would be able to answer that. But there's sort of...
Let me say something, what you're saying there about making the decision. Every decision is made on a spectrum of logic or emotion. And the more emotional a person is, the more struggle you have. So when you're choosing a life partner, for example, or you're going into business with someone, you want people that make logical decisions, because if they make emotional decisions, you can't work with those. And I'll give you an example. You can tell me that the New York Yankees have the highest RBI and the best pitching and the best attendance at a new stadium. And when you're all done, I'm going to tell you that I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan. No, let me explain. They have a better RBI. No, it's not a logical decision. It's an emotional decision, and you cannot logic a person out of an emotional decision. Now, when choosing a leader, if you go to a MAGA rally, you find any woman sitting on a bench with a MAGA hat on, Make America Great Again, and you say, why are you voting for Donald Trump? She will give you immediately 3, 4, 5 reasons about the border, about inflation, about safety in the neighborhood, about the list goes on and on. If you find a person who doesn't want to vote for Donald Trump, and you say, why are you voting for Kamala Harris? If you ask her, and sometimes I do this on Fox and things, what is the accomplishment? What particularly has she done that you admire? They're complete blank. I don't like this. I don't feel this. I feel that. I don't like it. And it's all emotion. Now that's dangerous. And our founders, that's why they didn't want to have total universal voting, because they wanted to have people that had a stake in it immediately, because the mobs can get carried away. And so what we want to have people is to focus on what you said. Where do we stand and what are we doing? And I have one more point that I want to make about that before we finish today. But I think that's what we need to be aware of, that one thing we know will bring peace and prosperity. The other candidate will not bring peace and prosperity. So therefore, our responsibility and obligation to God and our country is to not make emotional decisions, but to make logical, intelligent decisions as to what will be best for our nation and our children.
100%. Congressman, while I have you, I want to make sure we get to polling because I think that this is an important topic for my listeners to understand about. So if I can get your take on it, CNN keeps running these electoral maps. They're doing a little bit more than the other networks are right now. They just ran a scenario in which they used the margin of error numbers from 2020. You can also take a look at 2022 because it seemed to kind of flip the other way. But a lot of pollsters are doing this. But the outcome based on 2020 polling error at the end of the day and where the polls are today for this 2024 election, they've got Trump at 312 electoral votes. It would put Harris at 226, which would really be, I think, what we would categorize as a pretty much a landslide victory. Do you trust political polls? And which ones do you think are the most credible?
Well, you mentioned, Kyle, about how you take them. You can get a poll to say about anything that you want it to say. And so you can test a disproportionate number of young people or women or men or rural or urban or that sort of thing. And of course, they justify it by saying, this is how we did it. But nevertheless, people don't study all of the background, the tabs. All they look is the bottom line. And they will always keep their candidates alive. And I promise you that in the last 10 days before the election, there's going to be this great surge. And they're going to talk about the great surge for Kamala Harris. She's restored it. And how do we know what they're doing? Because it's what they accuse us of doing, and that is voter suppression. And so they do everything possible. All of the polls in 2020 said that Biden was going to carry Wisconsin between 17 and 25%. Well, what does that do? That discourages people from, if Trump's going to get beat 3-1, why would I go vote? And of course, as we know, it was just a handful, 14,000 or something. And so that is a very effective tool. And rather than talking about the issues, they cannot talk about the issues. They can't say, look what a great job that the left has done in New York. Look what they're doing in the great school system in Chicago. Look at the wonderful homeless situation in San Francisco and LA. They can't talk about, look at the chaos on the border. Look at the collapse of our military. They can't even beg people to even join anymore because they've lost such faith in the leadership. There's nothing that they can talk about to make them look good. So they're going to talk about poll after poll after poll after poll. And as you mentioned, you watch it, you just get bored watching because that's all that the networks want to talk about because they can't talk about the issues.
Yeah, there was a poll that just came out that wasn't too boring, actually. It was a New York Times poll that showed Donald Trump more popular than Taylor Swift. So I'm sure they're trying to swat that one out of the way really quickly. But
and the chaos that they've encountered, because I'm sure that they did a poll a year and a half ago and said if a person is indicted and they're running for office and they're being indicted, that their support will collapse. And I have no doubt about that. So then they went out and they got their corrupt prosecutors in 4 different jurisdictions to indict him. And people said, wait. I see what you're doing. I know what you're doing. And then they watched the actual trial, and they wait. This woman, she hasn't laid eyes on you. She accuses you, but she can't tell you whether it was winter or summer. And that it's a block and a half from one of the finest hotels on the planet. The hotel that you own and you went in. And so people say, no, I see this as a setup. And so their frustration is they've played all of these games. And what you said about Donald Trump, people say, no, I understand how this works. And you indict him again, he'll get more popular. Mm-hmm. You try to kill him, he'll get more popular. So they're in a real dilemma. So they had to literally take a sitting president, drop kick him, have a coup, bring in a candidate that nobody wanted or cared about, and they have to sell her quickly in just a matter of a handful of days.
They are in a dilemma, but it hasn't stopped them from trying to roll out some of these things. You mentioned a surge that is coming for Kamala, and what we have seen truly is that kind of the gloves are off in this election season. What, Bob, is your prediction for the October surprise? What do you think is going to happen here in these coming weeks right before Election Day?
Well, I think that there'll be some kind of a cyber dilemma that the computers won't work or they'll do something. See, as they did in 2008 with John McCain when they had the financial crisis, something that everything else is immaterial. We focus on that. And the purpose originally is to give the president an opportunity to prove himself as involved. But now that they do with her, I'm not sure what they're going to do. But I think that that's a distinct possibility. The banking system be disrupted, or something that will all focus on that, just as they did in 2020 when they focused on the pandemic rather than focusing on the issues. Coupled with the fact that I am very cautious, and I pray for his safety. That the Mayorkas and Biden have so diluted the protection of this man, Donald Trump, that he's available. As we know, for example, in Butler, there was only a handful of Secret Service agents there, just a handful right around him. All the rest of the people out that were supposed to do their job were ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. There are other detailed people that are under Homeland Security. See, the Secret Service was always beginning with McKinley, was always under the Treasury Department, because when they weren't protecting an individual, they were working with counterfeiters in the Treasury office, which is right next to the White House. When George Bush did the restructuring, he put it in the Department of Homeland Security. Well, in Homeland Security, it doesn't rate attention, and the quality of the Secret Service has just totally collapsed. It's absolutely horrible. And not that the people's hearts aren't good, but for example, they said that by the end of this decade, they want to have 1/3 females. Well, only 5% of the people who apply for the job are female. So what does that mean? That means you have to hire every female that applies. And so they just had a woman even on Kamala Harris's detail who went crazy and was yelling and screaming. They had to virtually put her in a straitjacket and take her off. She was a new female agent that had flunked every step along the way. But in order to do these kinds of things under Homeland Security, which is Mayorkas, who's in charge of the border, who accused the people of whipping people coming across, which was a total lie, all of that. So the Secret Service needs to be moved to a separate identity again, as it was before. If you look at what happened when Ronald Reagan was shot, you can replay that and see that everybody did everything absolutely perfectly. His detail on the left turned, spread his arms, made himself as big as he could to take the next bullet. The detail behind him immediately doubled her arms and slammed him on the floor of the limousine, which then took off within a second. Everything was done perfectly. When you see what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, you see we're 2.5 minutes. They're fiddling around there, and you can hear them say, "What do we do now? What do we do now?" And you can see the poor girl couldn't holster her weapon and all the chaos. So that's one of the things that I'm fearful about, is that his safety, and that they will pull some sort of financial cyber attack that will take the campaign off of the front pages so that they can talk about that and the polls and not have to talk about issues.
Mm-hmm. They just voted unanimously to give all presidential candidates the highest level of Secret Service protection. It might be for show, and this is a day late and a dollar short, to say the least. But it's interesting kind of that department is certainly in disarray, and it's not really just a funding issue. It seems like it's a training issue, and they've got to get it together. But really, not just Secret Service or FBI or DOJ in disarray. The White House is in disarray. Biden just held his first cabinet meeting in over a year, and the First Lady was there, seated at the table, not in a guest chair, a presenter seat. She was at the table kicking off this meeting, talking about a White House initiative. And I ask you about an October surprise, Bob, because my theory is that they are going to try to put Kamala Harris in the position of POTUS for those last couple of weeks leading up, so that people have the opportunity to kind of view her in that position, and that it might affect voting. Do you think there's any legitimacy to the potential of that?
Kyle, there's nothing that we can put beyond them. I mean, can you imagine that you call yourself the Democrat Party and you have such total contempt for democracy that you don't hold a single election? and that you nominate a person who was elected by no one, who has never received a single vote for president. When she ran, she had to withdraw even before they got to Iowa. So there's nothing that you can put beyond them. Now, we were counting on Jill to keep Joe in the race, and so we were hopeful that they weren't going to shove him off the cliff, so to speak. But so now I'm counting on Jill. She was presiding at the cabinet meeting today, and if she is able to, I'm for Jill to hang in there, because we're going to see what happens. There's one other thing I want to add before we're all done, and if I can talk about what makes America strong. And you hear in the campaign where they keep talking about taxing the business, tax the corporations. We're going to tax corporations. You need to understand that there is a very strong desire of large corporations to have that happen. And let me explain. That is that in order to get the price of a product on a shelf, it takes three things. It takes the raw material to make it. It takes the price of the producer, the manufacturer to make it, what you have to pay the workers to build it, and the cost of government overhead in order to function. Now, when you increase taxes such that we had the highest corporate tax rate in the world when Donald Trump became president, we were number two for a couple of months before he took office. Botswana was number one. America was number two. But then Botswana got wise, and America was then number one. When Donald Trump came in, he dropped it to the bottom fourth of the taxes to the rest of the world so that we could compete. Now, that made our products more amenable to the rest of the world. What Kamala Harris has said is she's going to increase taxes on corporations. And you saw these union folks were all clapping and cheering. Yeah, we're going to tax those corporations. Now stop and think about this. That means every single thing produced in America, she's going to increase the price of it. And who wants that to happen? Those multi-corporations, international corporations that have manufacturing facilities in China and elsewhere. They don't want to have to compete with America. So they make it cheaper, but then they still have to pay to transport it here and all. If they can increase the cost of products in America by increasing the taxes on businesses in America, then they'll continue to do what they've done. And if you don't know what they've done, go to any small town in America and walk down the street and look at every other store window that's closed. That's what they've done. And it doesn't happen by accident. Because under Donald Trump, America was growing and the stores were opening again. And we were, for the first time in 27 years, manufacturing was growing and not diminishing. And they hated that. And that's the people in New York and Los Angeles and Silicon Valley that take billions of dollars out of small town American banks and ship them for investments in China. They hated what Donald Trump was doing. And they know that if he gets in, he'll do it again. And that is, he'll lower the cost of production in this country, creating jobs in America. And that means their investments in China will not be as valuable. Final point. The stock market in Beijing, the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, the stock market in China went down 47%. That is, it went down nearly half. The stock market in America went up 55%. So while they were about to overtake us, instead, because of Donald Trump, America went up and they went down. And they are mad about that. And so when you hear Kamala Harris, every time she says we're going to increase taxes on corporations, remember, that means that every time a worker standing on a factory floor produces something, she's going to make it so uncompetitive that people won't be able to buy it. And if we vote for that, we will then, I fear, we're on the cusp of a real serious demise.
Yeah, we're facing two very distinct and different futures based on who is elected coming right up here. Well, Bob, I want you to leave us with a few thoughts. I mean, you know so much about so much. And I wish I could talk to you all day, and I hope that you'll come back again so we can continue the conversation. But leave our politically basic audience with the best of your thinking. And what do we do? Tell us what to do. I want to end on that note.
Let me tell you, the potential, for example, every new president is tested to see what they're made of. And so, for example, Mr. Putin, he had mercenaries. So they weren't actually Russian troops, but he hired, we all know about that, the folks that were running the war in Ukraine and all were friends of his, and that they have this force. And so he had one of those forces in Syria fire on an American base in Syria. And Donald Trump took out all 300 of those Russian mercenaries early on. Now that said to Mr. Putin, don't play games with us. You shoot at us, brother, you're in trouble. Well, he also took the Houthis, which were a group that are funded by the Iranians, and he made them a terrorist organization so that they couldn't travel, they couldn't go any place, people couldn't fund them, and all the rest. When Joe Biden and Harris came in, the first thing they did, they took away that jurisdiction. They started allowing oil to be bought from Iran, so they got money, so they could fund the Houthis and Hamas and these people that hate China and hate Israel. So all of this chaos began to filter out. And if we continue down that road, we know the consequences. We can see it. However, even though China has this billions of dollars they're investing in South America and in Africa and elsewhere, the people there don't like him. I'm privileged to host a prayer breakfast once a week with ambassadors while they're posted in Washington. And even though China seems to be on the move, the people do not like China. They like America, and they wish America would be more assertive. China is a paper tiger financially. It's dependent upon American money. It has a demographic crisis. They had this one-child policy for so long, and they killed all the girls, so they had all these boys that came up with their one child, and it's all kinds of chaos. We are on the precipice of the potentiality of our opposition really being in severe trouble. America, under the proper leadership, we have trillions of dollars in assets, in lumber and in natural resources and in oil and gas. So while we have this horrible debt, we can pay that thing off, but just like anybody else would when they have money in the bank. We could start using those things. If we got a president that wanted to pump oil and produce it around, pump natural gas, wanted to create these things, lower the taxes on auto production in this country so that we create the cars again. So when you go up and down the street, everything's not a Hyundai or a Kia or a Toyota, but it's an American car again. If we had a president who wants to do this nation can take off like a rocket. Everybody wants to do business with America when it's trustworthy. Under the proper leadership, it's very easily possible to make America great again. So we're at a crossroads. We can very seriously do permanent harm, I fear, if we continue down this road again. Last October, the BRIC countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the ones that are trying to come up with a new currency, 24 countries met in South Africa under the BRIC conference, all of them encouraged to attend by Barack Obama. 22 of them signed an agreement to go off the American dollar and go to a new currency to compete with America, to diminish America's influence. However, if America gets strong with a strong dollar, that initiative will never succeed. So we're at the possibility of going the wrong way and have permanent damage, or this nation can have a new birth of freedom, economic and political prosperity like we've never seen before. And just between you and me, I really think we're about to do it. We can win this election. We're going to see the next decade will be the greatest decade in over 50 years. It'll be a great, great time. God bless.
Beautifully said, Congressman. Thank you so much. And vote. We've got to get out and vote. Every single vote matters, regardless of what the mainstream media or the polls are telling you. We've got to get out there and take friends with you, too. So voting's happening right now. We got to make sure that we get the vote out. So, Congressman, thank you so much. You have so much wisdom to give our audience, and we are appreciative for every single word, and for you. You're just wonderful. So thank you for joining us on the show today.
Flattered and honored that you asked. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.